Hey there, fiber friends, I'm Sarah. Welcome to my yarn lab. And today I've got a video that I have been planning on doing for about 4 years now. Something always seems to come up this time of year. But that is a very beginner-friendly dyeing video, a yarn dyeing video using Easter egg dyeing kits. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. So in today's video, I actually have 3 sort of dyeing methods that I would recommend using Easter egg dye tablets. Up first is actually the original project that I had in mind for dyeing with Easter egg tablets, and that is doing solid. They're 90% solid. They're a little bit semi-solid, some more than others, but solid colors using Easter egg dye tablets for a project that I have been percolating on for, like 7 years maybe. So dye kits like this are readily available this time of year. As it's after Easter now, they may even be on clearance or markdown, but they're inexpensive. And what you want to look for are the ones that include the solid dye tablets. A number of these kits now have like liquid dyes or sort of interesting little bits of powdered dye, but the solid dye tablets are the ones that I use in this video. So first up, I have the Mitered Triangles sock by Catherine Alexander. This comes from Ann Budd's New Direction in Sock Knitting. I've had this book for probably close to 10 years. And I have wanted to knit this pair of socks almost since the get-go. So years and years, like 7+ years ago, I think, I ordered 2 skeins of Stroll Sport. This sock calls for 18 colors of about 22 yards each of a sport weight yarn. So what better way to do that than to dye it myself on some of Knitpicks' Bare Stroll Sport. This is a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 274 yards and 100 grams. So it's a heftier sport weight and should be great. It is a little bit low twist for a sock, so I'm not sure how well it will hold up, but these will be sort of more of a fun sock, probably not an everyday wear sock. And to dye it, I'm going to use 2 of these Dudley's, just your basic Easter egg kit that comes with 6 dye tablets. So from these 6 dye tablets, I aim to make 18 different colors and shades. So from those 2 skeins, I was able to make 20 25-yard mini skeins, and realistically, they're probably more like 27 yards. So I'll pull 2 aside since I only need 18, and then let's get ready to dye. So Easter egg dye tablets are essentially a food coloring dye, which means that they are an acid dye. So we require the dye. We want to have it happen in water. We're going to need a heat source. So I'm going to do my dyeing inside of these small glass canning jars on a canning rack inside a water bath. And you obviously need acid. I'm just going to use regular old-fashioned white vinegar. And you don't have to pre-soak your yarn, but I find that you'll get a much more even dye job if you do. So I'm going to pre-soak all of my yarn in this bowl of water, to which I'm going to add a cup of white vinegar so that theoretically the water that is soaked into the yarn is already acidic, which will help our dye set. The other thing is, I'm going to open up each one of these mini skeins twisted. You're going to sort of have dye set along the outside of the twist, and you'll end up with white spots where the 2 twists are crossing over and in the core of each twist. So I'm going to open up all of these mini skeins. The fact that they're tied in 2 places and that they're quite small should prevent any tangling. So I'm going to work in batches of 6, since that's how many jars I have, since that's how many dye tablets I have. So I've got 6 mini skeins that I have opened up, and I'm just going to try and get them nice and saturated with water. Wool's hydrophobic, and so it's going to sit on that surface and sort of resist it at first. But once it starts to accept the water, it can actually hold quite a bit of water within the yarn. And I find things like removing from the water and putting back in will help the yarn sort of fully saturate. You don't want to agitate too much, not because of felting. First of all, this is superwash treated. Second of all, you're not really gonna felt it unless you go to town, but you don't want to tangle, right? So try not to agitate too much. Some people will put like a plastic shower curtain ring on each skein when they've got their yarn in the dyeing stages, so that grabbing those rings can be helpful for pulling out your skeins. I didn't do that. I'm kind of regretting not putting a colored, sometimes I use acrylic yarn to tie my skeins, and using a colored piece of acrylic yarn can help you fish out your skeins, but these are small, so it'll be fine. Anyways, you could also soak this. I've seen some videos say soak for an hour, I've seen some people soak overnight. I am happy if it feels saturated. It's saturated enough for me. This is obviously a one-off dyeing experiment. If you were looking for a very repeatable process, then you would want to, you know, exactly time how long you soak for, record it. You know, you wouldn't have wanted to use a variable amount of water to the vinegar, but this is, you know, this is going to work in a maybe not reproducible manner, but it'll work. So anyways, yarn saturated, jars for dyeing. Let's mix up our dye next. So I've got my 6 clean jars here. Into each jar, I'm gonna put 3/4 cups of just room temperature water. I'm just using tap water, and we're on a well with relatively hard water. I've dyed with this water many times and found no problem with it. Again, if you want something consistent and reproducible, then you might want to consider, you know, using a consistent and reproducible source of water. But for a little bit of fun with some Easter egg dye, your tap water should be fine. I'm not being 100% accurate. Again, it doesn't really matter to me. And then I'm also going to put about a tablespoon of vinegar into each jar. Again, to create that acidic environment at which the dyes are reactive. And then for the first 6, I want to see just how concentrated of a color I can get with 1 dye tablet per the 10-gram skein of yarn. So I'm just dropping these in. And I'm going to grab a spoon so I can break up the dye tablets to facilitate them to dissolve a little faster. So, future Sarah here. I should have done this a little bit differently if I had bothered to read the instructions on the box, which I did 2 days later when we actually dyed eggs with my kids. I would have noticed that the recommendation for dissolving these tablets is to put the tablespoon of vinegar in the cup first, add the tablet to just the vinegar, and once it's fully dissolved in the vinegar, then go ahead and add your water to the cup. The reasoning for this is that the dye tablet is actually made up in a baking soda powdered solution, and the vinegar and the baking soda react in an acid-base reaction, which creates a lot of fizzing and really helps to break up that dye tablet completely and facilitate it dissolving completely without any flecks or speckles. Because I added it to the diluted vinegar solution, it wasn't a concentrated enough acid to really facilitate that reaction, and as you'll see, I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to crush up the dye tablets to really get rid of any chunks. I never actually get rid of all of the speckles and chunks, and as a result, my finished yarn has some evidence of speckling and chunks. So if you want to do this in a more accurate And certainly easier manner, 1 tablespoon of vinegar into your cup. Dye tablet goes in, let it fully dissolve. It'll do it all by itself with no crushing required. Then add your water to make up the rest of the solution. Don't do like me, do like future me. The nice thing about food coloring dyes, whether you're using actual food coloring or Easter egg dye tablets like this, is that they are of course food safe. And so, hey kitty, Lucy's coming to investigate here. They're food safe, and so you don't have to worry about wearing a mask when you're dyeing with them. They're also therefore really great if you wanted to do some dyeing experiments with kids. Sorry, I know I'm clanging this spoon on these jars quite a bit. And you'll notice I'm moving my spoon around between one cup to the next. Right now the dye is mostly in the solid tab form, and so I'm not at too much risk of contaminating from one into the other. I could have also considered using something like a mortar and pestle to break up these dye tablets prior to trying to dissolve them. That probably would have helped speed this up. It's like a weird kind of white foam in this green. I don't know if that's particularly apparent, that sort of white foamy situation. I'm just gonna try and take that out. So like I said, Easter egg tablets in Canada at least, they're considered a food product. Some people will dye Easter eggs and then consume the hard-boiled egg after, or I know Italians will bake breads that have a dyed Easter egg in them, so they do list all the ingredients in that tablet. We've got sodium chloride, salt, sodium bicarbonate, so like a baking soda, sodium sulfate, just another variety of salt, a microcrystalline cellulose, not sure why that's in there, maybe just to fill it out. And then we have FD&C yellow number 5, yellow number 6, red number 3, blue number 1, and then soybean oil. And I'm guessing the precipitate that I'm getting at the top here, which looks very hydrophobic, is that soybean oil. So we'll have to make sure we wash our yarns with soap after. You can see that white sort of weird precipitate. But I don't think it should impact the actual dyeing process. I'm just trying to pull as much of that kind of crud off the surface as I can. All right, I'm just going to fish a little bit more of the crud off the surface of these cups. And that's also going to take some of the chunks of undissolved dye out. They're not perfectly dissolved. There's definitely some little chunks like that in there. So we might get some irregularities and speckles in our yarn, and that is fine with me. We're gonna call this good enough. You can see I've thrown some gloves on because I'm gonna get right in here with my hands in a second. I'm going to grab my bowl of yarn and I'm going to fish one skein out and squeeze off the excess water. So it's still wet, but the excess water has been squeezed out. And I'm going to get this kind of all at once into my cup of dye. Let's go up and down once or twice to make sure it penetrates fully into the middle. And there we go, simple as that. Let's go for skein number 2. Okay, and into orange. Now, some of this dye is going to set without heating, just because it's a reactive dye. All heating really does is it accelerates the reaction. So some of the color sets right away, but we want as much of the color as possible to set, which is why we're going to heat this on the stove after. But since some of that color sets right away, you want to avoid, for instance, lowering, the tail end of the skein in and then slowly getting to the top, because you will get, even in the unheated situation, more dye striking at the bottom. The dye concentrate in the solution becomes less concentrated as you get to the top. So you want to get it in sort of all at once as best you can. So quickly here into the purple. And into the green. So that's where we are at. Yarn in the dye and no heat yet. I'm gonna go ahead and move these onto the stove in my canning rack inside that pot so that we can heat it up. And what we're looking for is for the solution to clear so that all of the color ends up bound into the yarn and is no longer in the water. And the way that you can test that, aside from visibly, is to take some white paper towel, and if you dip your white paper towel in, you can see how there's still orange here. If I dip this over here in the blue, there's clearly still a lot of blue in that solution. So when the dye has cleared from the solution and is irreversibly bound to that yarn, then it won't bleed onto the paper towel anymore. So I've got those jars into water and I've brought it up to a simmer, and already just looking at the jars I can tell that as soon as we came up to the simmering temperature, the pink, the yellow, the orange, the dye has cleared, like I said, where it, like if you kind of look, sorry, the steam in my hand are messing with the focus, but if you kind of look around the edge of the water in that orange jar, you can see that the yarn is vibrantly orange, but the water looks quite clear around it. Blue dye I find is notoriously hard to clear 100%, but it has certainly cleared from where it was before. And I'm gonna let this sit at this sort of low simmer, so it's not a big rolling boil, it's just a low simmer for maybe 20 minutes. Although quite honestly, that's probably overkill. I consider, certainly these three to be set and good to go right now. Here's that trick with the paper towel. So you can see nothing from the orange, nothing from the pink, nothing from the yellow. Still a little bit of blue color. Like I said, the blue is notoriously difficult to set. And let's test the green. A little bit of green, but that green, if you remember from the package, there was no green food coloring. There was blue food coloring and yellow, so that's just that unset blue. And the same kind of goes for that purple. So we'll give it a little bit longer, and then I will wash these out. And here's a fun little trick. See how when I dipped it in the purple, it's separated into a sort of pink and a blue color, so you can really see. There was no purple dye, there were blue dye and red dye. All right, so that first round of colors was maximally saturated. Second round of colors, we're gonna start off the same way with the 3/4 cups of water approximately and a tablespoon of vinegar. Oops. And a dye tablet in each of my jars. And we'll break them up with the spoon, get them really nice and dissolved. And then I think what I want to do is a second set of colors that are half as concentrated for everything except for the pink and the yellow. For the pink and the yellow, I will actually try and bump them up. I'll add a little bit of purple to the pink to see if I can't shift it to sort of a darker version or a more magenta-y version, and a little bit of orange to the yellow to shift a little bit that way. So we'll go with half saturated and then shift it up. And then for the third round, we will use what's left to really mix and match some things. So while I give these a little bit of time to dissolve on their own, I will remind you again that the egg dye is just food coloring. That is packaged in a little tablet, you know, priced rather inexpensively. These kits were only $2.89, $2.98. But it's, you know, this tiny bit of food dye that is really only sufficient to dye a handful of eggs, or in a concentrated manner, 10 grams of yarn. For dyeing yarn with a kitchen safe, food safe, kid safe situation, I wouldn't recommend that you go out and buy Easter egg kits. I would recommend that you go out and buy food dye. Whether you go with something like the Wilton's gels, I've dyed very successfully with these. It's very concentrated. You can get really far with their wide range of colors, as well as mixing and matching. Or whether you go as simple as these little 4-packs, you've got you know, your primary colors, the red, blue, and yellow. The green is really just a combo dye. But yeah, so whether you go as simple as this, it'll save you that step of having to crush and dissolve the dye tablet. It'll save you the step of having to skim off the sort of fatty precipitate that you get in this solution. And it'll save you from contributing to, you know, purchasing a ton of packaging, a ton of inside here. This one has 4 little plastic packets of plastic dust. It has, you know, a little sheet of stickers. Just saying, these are fun. Don't get me wrong. I certainly have bought them, obviously, for this and multiple times in the past for my kids. But you can dye eggs and yarn just with food dye. Okay, so those are fairly well dissolved. Like I said, I'm not going to do the full saturated colors the second time. We're going to go to a sort of half concentrated situation. And I am just really eyeballing this, so I've split this blue in half. Going to top it back up with water. And so one would expect, just from looking at it, that this situation would produce a lighter blue than the previously dyed one. Is that going to be enough of a step down, is my sort of next question for myself. You know what, we're going to step that down a second time. You can always add less dye. You can always add more dye, you can't add less, right? So we're going to go with this for my less concentrated blue. Put these to the side. Let's go about 1/3 of the purple then. My less concentrated purple. Same with the green. Same with the orange. And then to my yellow, I'm going to add some of that orange. And these look a little bit similar, but I think should give us 2 distinct shades. And to my pink, I'm going to add just a little splash of that purple. Just a little bit more. And you can see that's giving us a more purpley pink. And then, just like before, let's get my gloves on and get the yarn into the dye. And here's round 2. I think it's very clear, at least to my eyes, that these look like a different set of 6 colors than my first round. And here's the dye I have left over to play with for my last round. And in my pot now, you can see that first set. I let it simmer for 20 minutes and then just turned the heat off. I'm going to pull them out now. But all of my dye has fully set. You can see when I test this purple now, you know, there's really almost no blue color at all left. Yeah, basically nothing. The green, same thing. This blue, nothing. Or maybe there's the tiniest hint of blue there. But the dye is set, so I can pull these out, let them cool down a bit, and then give them a quick wash. You can use a wool wash or dish soap. I'll probably use soak, but in the past I've used a Dawn dish soap to great success as well. So there's that first set of 6 that have just come out, and the second set of 6 that are about to head in. And you can see they are definitely 6 different colors. All right, so to do my last 6 colors, I really should have reserved a little bit of the pink and the yellow from the last round, but those dyes were so like undersaturated that combination wasn't thinking and just erred on the side of using them all. So I've got about half of my orange, I've got half of my blue, as well as half of the diluted blue, 2/3 of my purple, 2/3 of my green. And I grabbed a couple extra jars. So let's see what I can mix and match out of this situation. And I'm just going to use some of my soaking water here now. So, let's go with something that is sort of half green and half blue. And that'll be fairly dark. And then let's go with something that has the rest of that lighter blue in it, or a little bit of that lighter blue, and just a splash of that green. That'll hopefully give me a much lighter teal. Off that. Then let's go with this blue and this purple together. Let's go with the orange with a splash of purple in it. That kind of is muddying right out, but it might give us an interesting color. It's kind of like an amber color. And then, what do we have left over here? I don't know if I want to muddy that out. The purple and the green together. Those look pretty similar. Let's go heavier on the purple to that. I'm just playing, guys. And then last but not least, let's go heavy green with a little purple. And I'm leaving rings on my table. Sort of a muddy green. All right, we'll see what we get out of this. Guys, I probably should have had gloves on for all of that mixing, as you can see that I am dyeing my skin. It'll fade. I just really diluted that down to what is currently in the jar, and I was already struck just to differentiate these two a bit. So I've got 6 more colors to throw in my pot, and then I'll have 18 distinct colors. Here are those last 6 colors. I think with the exception of this green, which I think is going to come out very similar to the unadulterated green, I think that I definitely have 16 distinct colors here. Sorry, 18. And there's these ones in the pot. It is boiling perhaps a bit too much. It's probably not going to hurt anything though. So I will finish the 20-minute cook, if you will, on these colors and then swap them out for these ones. And then we'll rinse everything, let it dry, and we'll see what we got. So here are those 18 colors. The first 6, which is the fully saturated 1 tab of Easter egg dye to 1 10-gram skein yarn. The second 6, which are essentially diluted or altered versions of the first 6. And the last 6, which were sort of mixing and matching what I had left. So I do think that even these two being quite similar, in this lighting it's not showing up great, but they are still distinct from each other. So into the sink they'll all go now to be washed and hung to dry. And I'm just washing them in the sink. Although I don't expect any of these colors to bleed, I am washing them similar colors together in a group. So here's the oranges and yellows, and to my eyes it looks like 5 distinct colors. Just some Dawn dish detergent and warm soapy water. So here are the mini skeins washed and dried. These are the first 6, so this was the 1 full dye tablet per 10-gram mini skein. And you can see that I got very saturated, vibrant colors across these 6. The purple did have a little bit of sort of the dye splitting and speckling. I'm not sure how apparent that's coming across on camera, but you can see that there is some splitting and speckling. That may have been improved by dissolving my dye tablets correctly. It may also have been just a result of this being a sort of compound dye. Like I mentioned, the purple is really a mixture of red and blue dye, and red dye tends to strike very quickly, and blue dye tends to take longer in that heating process. And so that red dye may have struck in spots sort of initially and then exhausted before it kind of penetrated to the full skein. So I'd be curious to see if I had dissolved that tablet correctly, if I could have got that purple to be more even. But my first 6 colors, very nice. I'm going to go ahead and lay my second 6 next to the first 6. And if you recall, these are the ones where I diluted some of my colors. So I diluted my green and got a lighter green. I diluted my blue, got a lighter blue. Same for the orange and same for this purple. And then for this pink, I added a splash of purple into the pink and got sort of a richer, darker pink. In this lighting, they're somewhat similar, but I believe they are still quite distinct. And for this sort of more golden yellow, I added a little bit of orange to this yellow. So this yellow here, the original dye tablet, is a very cool, almost green yellow. And adding a splash of orange gave me a much more warm yellow. So that puts us at 12 distinct colors. And then for my final 6, these are the ones that I really played around with things. This was that amber color that I got by adding a little bit of, I don't recall if it was purple or green, to my leftover orange. And it looked really muddy in the jar, but you can see that the result was a really nice golden orange. This was a diluted purple with a splash of blue. I believe this is the one where I actually poured the excess dye out to water it down further. This is my favorite color to come out of the bunch, which was a mostly blue with a touch of green, gave me a really lovely teal. This was a blue and purple combo. that will sort of line up here, although really it's more related to these two. Like I said, my last batch didn't actually have any leftover pink or yellow to use. And then finally I have two greens that were sort of made up by using a mostly green stock and adding some blue in. But you can see I have four distinct greens. I'll kind of put this over here. Four distinct greens, three really distinct blues, three distinct oranges, a pair of pinks, a pair of yellows, and then sort of a purple set. And overall, I have 18 distinct colors from those 6 dye tablets, although I did use 2 of each dye tablet. And that's the finished 18 skeins. And I'm filming this as I'm editing along and have noticed that this video has just gone a lot longer than I intended to. So we're going to call it quits on part 1 of Easter egg dyeing here. Just showing you the wide variety of colors that I was able to drive from just those 6 different dye tablets. I encourage you to experiment with this at home, especially because I've noticed that different Easter egg dyeing kits often come with a different set of 6 dye tablets. And also, I'd be really curious to see if you're able to drive a different rainbow of colors. I know that I certainly would have gotten more diversity if I had reserved some of my pink and yellow from the first and second batch to include in my third batch, and instead I ended up with maybe a little bit more blue and green than I would have ideally liked in my final set. But overall, I'm very pleased. Again, would I recommend that you go out and purchase Easter egg kits for yarn dyeing? Not necessarily. But I would point out that if you're dyeing eggs with your kids, that uses such a teeny tiny amount of the dye that's available in those cups. And I would recommend that you consider throwing some of that dye on yarn afterwards. And if that's not a spoiler for part 2 of this video, then I don't know what is, because that's exactly what we did with my kids to make these skeins of yarn, but could have easily dyed solid colors as well. And I also tried a technique that I've been thinking about for years, which is whether or not you can speckle effectively with Easter egg dye. So all of that will be in the part 2 of this video that'll be going up tomorrow. But for today, I am very pleased with my results. Would I do this again? No, I would probably, if I was looking for a kitchen safe, food safe dyeing method, I would probably just go to food coloring dyes. You get a lot more bang for your buck with a lot less packaging. Or I would stick with my tried and true purpose purchased acid dyes. But for leftover egg dye, next year I think we will consider dyeing solids. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Comment below for what experiments you would like to see next coming out of this yarn lab. And in case I was really on the ball in my video editing today, this is an end card and you can click right here when the part 2 of this video goes live tomorrow. Happy knitting, spinning, dyeing, experimenting with fiber, because after all, this is the Yarn Lab.